All right. Hey, good morning, folks. Once again, we are back taking a look at the tropics. Today is Sunday, September 8th, 2024. This is your morning tropical update on Invest 91L, our area of interest in the southern Gulf of Mexico. We have a low pressure system developing down here near the tail end of a cold front stretched across the eastern U.S. And the system is expected to develop into a tropical depression, a tropical storm over the next 2 or 3 days, moving northward towards Texas and eventually recurving towards Louisiana with a landfall somewhere in western or central Louisiana, either late Wednesday or on Thursday. So we have our probably first bona fide tropical impact to the U.S. since Tropical Storm Debbie or Hurricane Debbie. I don't remember, because it's been so long. Back a few weeks ago, but this system is likely to be our next threat and our first named storm formation since Ernesto. So the Atlantic Basin is waking up from its slumber. We also have other areas of interest to watch. We have a low pressure system that's developed in the MDR way out in the middle of the Atlantic. This is going to move generally off to the northwest over the next couple of days, and we have another wave leaving Africa. It looks like the subseasonal the forcing is kind of coming back into play for the Atlantic Basin, so it looks like we're going to have a couple things to watch over the next few weeks. But today, 91L takes center stage. Now, morning update from the National Hurricane Center. They're up to an 80% chance of development in the next 48 hours. This is very likely going to become a tropical depression. It could be as soon as tonight. I could also see them maybe potentially making this a potential tropical cyclone to get the first watches and warnings up for parts of South Texas. But it could either be a PTC or a tropical depression. But I would think by tomorrow afternoon, we're going to have something named on deck here. And again, those odds are very high at this point. It's very likely we have our next named storm soon, which will be Francine whenever it gets around to it. The hurricane hunters were expected to go investigate this today. It looks like they just got off the ground here in Keesler. I think they must have had a maintenance issue because one of their aircraft didn't take off, and then they've got a new one. So they may have rolled to their backup and then gotten going. So they're a little bit behind schedule, but we will have them later today. I just wanted to go ahead and get this video knocked out this morning, but we'll post this afternoon what they find, because what they find will be very curious. This is the satellite presentation of Invest 91L this morning. And again, we're dealing with two different areas of low pressure expected to become one. We have to our south this area of low pressure down here in the Bay of Campeche. We have a definitely consistent thunderstorm activity associated with it. This was formerly the tropical wave that we were watching way back before Labor Day out in the Antilles. It ran all the way across the Caribbean and moved across the Yucatan Peninsula and wound up in the southern Gulf of Mexico. And we also have this little low pressure here on the tail end of a cold front, and this is sinking southward, and this is probably going to wrap up into the other low, and then together they're going to begin to move northward over the next few days. So these two systems expected to merge into one. It's not like the movies where two lows make one giant low. They just kind of meld into each other. So it's not really like two major storms becoming, it's not like some perfect storm stuff. Don't worry about that. But all this chaos will eventually consolidate into one system. Now, there's going to be some interesting dances here, though, with where this flow stacks up, where the lows stack, where the mid-level vortexes stack. Everything's got to kind of figure itself out and shake out into place. So these forecasts are still a bit subject to change until we really get a defined area of interest. The Hurricane Hunter flight will be very interesting today to see what is going on under this canopy of clouds. We can't really tell if we have a closed low-level center of circulation yet. We can see the low-level clouds in this shot are moving like this, which tells us that we might have an elongated area of low pressure. The low-level clouds to the north are still rotating around the low to the north. So we have a low up here, we have the low-level center up to this system, and then we likely have another area rotating down this way, but there really isn't a lot of low-level clouds in this area. We just simply can't tell from all the cirrus blow-off and intense thunderstorm activity. But given the fact that the low-level clouds in this quadrant are moving more north and they're not moving more northeast and easterly, it tells me that we probably have an elongated area of low pressure here, something like this, and then we have our other area of low pressure to the north, which is going to move down and begin to wrap around this one. Then it'll kind of start spinning up together into a more coherent vortex. I can see something kind of broad. That's why I think the potential tropical cyclone tag could be applied tonight or maybe early tomorrow, and then it'll move north from there. Looking at the GFS, showing you the future of how all this plays out, we can see this modeled pretty clearly here today on the GFS. This is valid earlier this morning. GFS clearly shows a low-level center to the north and then a broad low-level center to the south, a much bigger low. And again, watch how this little one pinwheels into the bigger one and then kind of pivots all together. See how it kind of spins up into one, and then we kind of have this still kind of broad, elongated sort of vortex. That's probably going to take some time to consolidate, I would imagine. But then the GFS eventually does consolidate it, and it does very fast. The GFS is by far the most aggressive model we have this morning. for Invest 91L. So this is probably an unrealistic time frame to go from this broad mess all the way to, you know, fully stacked in 12 hours. So I think the GFS solutions where this real high end kind of look is a bit much. I think the model is probably just overdoing that vorticity. I think it's going to be a much sloppier, you know, storm going into Monday afternoon to early Tuesday. I think more Tuesday, Wednesday is where the storm may find its footing and get some chance to organize further. But the general flow is going to be more of a northwest motion, becoming more northeast as we go into Wednesday. So this is Tuesday morning. I'm just showing the GFS for sake of brevity. Moves northward. By this point, we're going to have tropical storm watches and warnings up the Texas coastline. I think most of the Texas coastline is at least going to get some tropical storm force winds. Now, talking about Texas directly in Houston, so far the model consensus is that this is going to get to the east of Houston, which means you guys are going to be on the, quote, better side of the storm. I don't want to act like it's going to be a picnic. You're going to know there's a tropical storm or potentially a low-end hurricane off the coast. But I think that, you know, outside of the immediate coastal counties, this is not going to be a hard hit. And I think the rainfall totals are going to be limited because of the dry air on the backside of the storm. On tropical tidbits here, we can switch over to the mid-level relative humidity, and we can see that there's a lot of dry air lurking back to the east, or to the west rather, of the storm. And I think that as the storm approaches, this is going to pull that drier air in. Some of these models are showing it a little less aggressive, but you know, there's definitely going to be some drier air beginning to wrap around the storm as it approaches. So I think that the rainfall will likely be more like Tuesday into Wednesday. And then as the storm gets close, Wednesday night into Thursday, some of that drier air may come in and choke off those rain showers and whatnot. So I think that generally speaking, you're going to see this, you know, kind of taper off as it approaches, but it's going to depend on the intensity, because like if we wind up getting this GFS solution where there's a bona fide hurricane off the coast, then you're definitely going to be feeling it. But if we have, say, a more sloppy tropical storm that may be more right side weighted, you guys may not get that much. The trajectory of the storm is going to limit the storm surge potential. It won't be zero. You will have some coastal flooding. But I think generally for the Texas coastline, you're going to see a couple inches of rain, some tropical storm force winds, some coastal surge to some degree, some minor coastal flooding, that kind of thing. But I think the worst of the storm will likely stay offshore of you guys. Now, as we look over into Wednesday night into Thursday, we have this moving into Louisiana. Now, again, the GFS, the outlier here showing a very strong hurricane, likely like category 3 on this GFS run. But this is the 12Z GFS is really going for it. But again, this is an outlier compared to the rest of our model suites. And I'll show you some encouraging things as far as intensity goes in a minute. But this is kind of what the GFS is calling, bringing this in at 957, right along between Vermilion Bay and Cameron, Louisiana, western Louisiana, central kind of western Louisiana. Looks like the target right now. So the GFS here, European model for what it's worth, not showing much of anything, more of a sloppy tropical storm. And you can see that this is probably going to be right and north weighted, where most of the heavier rain showers and storms are kind of on that north and east side of the circulation. So if you're in eastern Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, even into northern Louisiana and central Mississippi, you know, you guys can get a lot of heavy rain and some strong winds from this. But you can see even into Thursday morning, a lot of the backside of the storm is dried out, and then some drier air filtering in around Texas. So that's the case here. And one of the two of the reasons we think this might be the case is I think as the storm approaches, it's going to have pretty favorable moisture and wind shear down in this pocket of the Gulf of Mexico. But as the storm gets closer, two things start happening. Number one, we have a trough over Texas and a high over southern Florida. So the steering flow is very set. The storm is basically just going to come up like this, and some version of that. You know, I think the goalposts here are somewhat narrow, but as this approaches, the wind shear is going to pick up pretty dramatically out of the west for this storm. So I think more wind shear is going to begin to try to weaken this as it approaches. And if we look at the mid-level relative humidity, virtually all our models are showing a lot of dry air, again, invading that backside. You know, Houston right here, we can see a lot of drier air moving in on the backside of the storm, and this should begin to kind of push out that heavier weather to the east and to the north. So again, a lot of heavy thunderstorms and heavy rain and winds and whatnot in this area that we've circled. But again, the backside of the storm will not be nearly as intense as that, you know, center, and then again center right, where a lot of times with this setup, almost this area is worse off than who actually gets the center, except for like maybe in terms of wind gusts, because that dry air really kind of chokes off those storms and doesn't let the storm be as intense as it could be. What's interesting about this storm is looking at the hurricane specific models, our HWRF, HFAST, HMON, all of them showing a weaker storm than the GFS by magnitudes. Like the HWRF, for what it's worth, who uses GFS conditions, is only showing 1,000 millibars at landfall, which is a tropical storm of some kind, but a weaker one. And again, we're on that western side of Louisiana. H-Mon, same thing, 1,000 millibars early on Thursday, a very dried out, sloppy mess where, again, you can see here, 1,000 millibars, you see where the center of circulation is. Look at where the strongest winds are, well off to the east by something 50 to 80 miles. So you could be over in like Grand Isle and whatnot and be getting stronger winds than whoever actually gets the center of circulation. That's what I'm trying to convey here is how this might set up. HFAS also, it's stronger than the HMON or HWRF, but coming in at 982. But again, showing that very blown out kind of southern section where this dry air really wraps around. And then what would happen is most of the heavier rainfall and whatnot would be to the north of the storm. So depending on how fast that dry air begins to invade and kind of clocks that weather up to the north and to the east and then eventually up to the north will depend who actually gets the worst of this storm. So again, we say this with every storm, but not a storm you want to look at just that center of circulation. There's going to be some bigger impacts across the central Gulf Coast this week, from Texas all the way to probably Alabama and Florida to some degree or another. A couple looks at our regional models here. 0Z or 12Z runs have come in and been a little bit back further to the west. Earlier this evening, they were trending more towards central Louisiana. This was 0Z yesterday, overnight last night, but again, a lot more to the east. And then they've kind of pushed back. This windshield wiper effect will continue until we get a closed, defined center of circulation. So we don't want to get too wrapped up in this. I think if anywhere from Houston to New Orleans is still the goalpost for the storm. So anywhere in here, and again, that's just the center. If we move this to eastern Louisiana, then all that heavy weather moves into parts of Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida. If we move this further west, which would likely be a weaker storm with less time over water, then again, that heavier weather likely shifts back to Louisiana and some of northern Texas. So that's just kind of the way that shakes out. So we look through those. Intensity guidance came back up a little bit. We're now looking at the ship's model, kind of leading the pack for the most part. Again, coming in right about that upper tropical storm low Cat 1 intensity for a mile. That's still my bet and my call or my thought is that we're going to probably see this go into like a high-end tropical storm, maybe peak near low-end Category 1 hurricane somewhere off the coast of Texas, probably early Wednesday, midday Wednesday, and then likely do a combination of wind shear and drier air would likely begin to weaken as it actually moved into land. But again, until we have the actual center, we don't want to get too wrapped up, but that's generally been the model call as tropical storm, with some of our more reliable models pushing that upper end of the guidance. So it'll be interesting to see what the Hurricane Center's first call is. Probably I'm thinking like a 65 knot tropical storm and then unwinding a little bit towards landfall. Rainfall to come from the WPC, widespread 4 to 6 inches from much of the Gulf Coast. And you see the rainfall totals for Houston and even down into Corpus Christi and Brownsville near the coast. Again, very coastal, isolated event. Coastal counties getting the heaviest rain, but 3 to 6 inches of rain is going to fall through the rest of this week. So another wet week ahead for the Texas coastline, but you can see that the rainfall totals fall off dramatically further inland. And then Louisiana probably going to take the brunt of this right now. But look at how far those 4 to 6 inch rainfall totals extend all the way into parts of western Florida. So if you're in Alabama, Mississippi, eastern New Orleans, eastern Louisiana, you're also going to get a lot of heavy rain from this. And as this works up, you very well may see a lot of that rain shunt northward. So all along the Mississippi River, especially the southern half of it, even in the parts of Arkansas and the western Tennessee Valley, may see several inches of rain going into this weekend associated with what will likely be Francine. So that's what I got for you guys on your morning update on Invest 91L. Again, we're going to watch carefully, see what the hurricane hunters have this afternoon. I'll have it on the page. We'll do another quick video tonight, or we'll have one tomorrow afternoon on the updates on what's going on. So until then, guys, as always, thanks for watching and have a good one.